So, Master Koval, this is our first time meeting. It's kind of an interesting story. I just want to tell our viewers a little bit about how I stumbled upon you, sort of randomly. You have a YouTube channel, and I just sort of stumbled upon that, and then I noticed at the bottom that it said uh, Solon. And I was like, Solon, like Solon, Ohio? And I clicked on it, and sure enough, it was Solon, Ohio. And then because I'm a little nosy, I did some sleuthing and went to your webpage and saw that you had some lessons from Muhan Kim up there.
Yeah. Yep.
Some letters. And immediately I was like, Muhan Kim, that was like my second master way back, like 27 years ago. And what a small world. And I reached out to you and you said that you had trained under Muhan Kim. And so we must have been training at that school, maybe at the same time.
Yeah, almost certainly. I'm guessing you went to the East Side School in Lyndhurst because you mentioned the dungeon basement. Uh,
I was in Mayfield.
Yep, that's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing back then. It was such a great time, and we for sure had to have been there at the same time because I've been training for about 30 years, and I started in 1989, 1990, roughly.
Same amount of time that I've been training too, 30 years.
Yeah, so you must have jumped in there like right as I was a couple years in. So you might have remembered me as the really obnoxious smart mouth kid. That would have been the best way to describe me at that time. But yeah, that program was amazing. For those of you who don't know, probably most of you, back in the day, all Taekwondo in the Cleveland area was basically Master Kim and his brothers. Like that was like the dominant force of Taekwondo in the area. And while there were other schools, certainly, like they were the ones who were the most prominent leaders of Taekwondo in this community. And every year they had this giant tournament where they had like 500 people show up for it. That it was an in-house tournament, along with a couple of like offshoot schools, and it was just amazing. And like,
do you remember when the little Tigers came?
Mm-mm.
You don't remember this?
The kids class was like before the adult class and all that, and I never went to the kids class.
Okay.
And I remember they had this really nice lady who ran it, but I never went to it. I always trained as an adult.
So the Little Tigers are like the junior version of the Korean Tigers, which are like the top demo team for Taekwondo. And they came to Ohio when I was training. I think it was when I was training at Muhan Kim. And they actually stayed, two of the Little Tigers stayed with me and my brother at our house. And they were just fantastic.
Oh, okay.
They did a little demonstration at his tournament. And that's why they had come. They were like traveling around the United States.
Yeah.
They stopped in and did a demonstration of the tournament, but it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's why I was a little bit confused because generally I hear the term Little Tigers. It's used very commonly for a lot of schools to describe kids programs.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't mean like the modern version of Little Tigers. I mean like...
No, I know what you're talking
old
about
school.
Now.
Yeah.
It was cool. Like, I mean, there were like some crazy guys who would show up at this tournament. Like, you would get guys who were like Junior Olympics, guys who were like national level competitors at this tournament. And it was super, super competitive. And it was crazy because you would see these guys who competed on a national level losing to these gym warriors, these guys who they went to the one tournament once a year, but the rest of the time they were just monsters in the gym. And it's one of those things like a lot of guys forget about. Like they think, well, if you're not winning all these medals, maybe you're not that great. But man, I'll tell you what, there are some guys that are just scary who are gym warriors. And like you would see that at these tournaments, like these really, really prestigious guys would show up and just not make it that far.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to remember if there was even a kids class at the school when we were there. There might have been, but I just remember there was adults kind of mixed in with the kids.
Yeah, that's what we basically did. Like they had a kids class, but like I said, I never went to it. I always went with my dad, so we went to the adult classes.
Yeah.
And it was a great program. Like, we described the basement where like it reminds me a lot of like Mickey's and Rocky, where like it's grungy, it smells like mold, there's duct tape holding things together and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
But then you had on the wall, it's like where a lot of schools had your goal is black belt, like you just see Discipline House instead.
Yeah.
And it was a very legitimate old school Taekwondo where like you learn to kick with power. None of the tappy foot stuff I see in a lot of schools today, but I mean like legitimate, like hard kicking, a lot of hand punching, which is uncommon in Taekwondo, and cross training and judo, stuff like that. It was fun. It was great.
Yeah. When some of my students start to complain about how maybe this or that isn't as neat as they'd like. I remind them of that school and where we came from, because, now there's been such a revolution in the martial arts training that, most schools are very clean, very well put together.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and back in the day, it was just like the Wild West. You go to tournaments, you fight against kung fu guys and karate guys, and, schools were like in the basements, with moldy carpet
Yeah.
and, insulation falling down. And, his Master Muhan Kim school wasn't that unusual, honestly, at
No,
that
I
time.
agree. I totally agree. I think, when you talk about like the 80s and 90s, it was, like you said, the Wild West, where guys didn't put a ton of money into their schools. It was like a very old school Korean mentality, or old world mentality, where you just got a location and you trained. It's like, you hear about like the Gracie started in a garage in California. And like, that's like kind of how a lot of these old school programs started. And now I go to these facilities and they're so nice. Like, and I'm not complaining, like having AC when you train is amazing.
Yeah.
But it's different from what I came up with.
Well, the level of professionalism in the martial arts really started to skyrocket in the 90s. We had like the martial arts industry sort of come about, and people started to learn, what they need to do to be successful. Now trying to break into the industry is very difficult, because you need to like have a lot of money, and you need to know exactly, how do you answer a phone call? How do you talk to a prospective student? How do you give a school tour? How do you table at an event? Like a lot of extra skills that weren't necessarily needed, like business skills that weren't necessarily needed back in the day, because everyone was just kind of like a martial artist.
For sure. Like Master Kim just had this giant Yellow Pages ad and it filled his school. Like, it wasn't like he had to do like if you put out a Yellow Pages ad today, that will draw nothing to you. Like, the amount of marketing that you have to do, like you're talking about Google ads, you're talking about promoting yourself, going out and doing outreach. This is why, like, as much as I hate the idea of like these schools that are like birthday parties and stuff like that, and they tend to like do all this kind of like, how do I put it? Like, Taekwondo has a reputation for doing things that are just about promoting and like fast tracking. And I want to shit on it, but on the same note, like, these are guys this is their livelihood, and they want to teach martial arts. They want to do what they love, but sometimes you have to do the things you don't love in order to do the things that you do love. And I can't really fault them for trying to promote people when, the dues are just paying the lease on the place, right?
Yeah.
They're paying themselves out of testing fees. They're out of these parties and stuff like that. That's how they make their salary. And I get that. Like, I'm fortunate that I don't have an overhead. But the way that you market today, and the fact that like, I would even consider opening a place now unless I had at least 50 students. I'm fortunate that I have a small program with no overhead, but I've thought about this a lot, like what I would have to do, how I would have to sublease, how I would have to market. And the business sense is just so much more advanced than it used to be.
Yeah, it's very challenging. I started my school here in Texas about 4 years ago from scratch. And it was, balls to the wall running, very difficult for the first couple of years to get it off the ground. Yeah, it was, but I had been training in like leadership programs my whole life, and, learned, how to do the business, but even still, it's never easy.
No, and I don't think it ever gets easy in martial arts, because like up here, for example, it's so competitive that like in the Cleveland area now, like it's this weird little mecca that I've talked about before, that people don't realize how much martial arts there is in the area. It's crazy the amount of martial arts schools in the Cleveland area. Like, I travel to other cities sometimes.
Yeah.
And whenever I go there, like, I'm surprised by how few like martial arts programs there are by comparison. And if you like, I don't know how Texas is, but if you happen to live in a city like that, it's very hard to match that. Mm-hmm. And it's not even just within your own style now. Like, it's comparing with other styles, but even in like jujitsu, like, 10 years ago, there was 2 jujitsu schools in the area. Mm-hmm. Now there's like 15. And that's a big difference. Like, when you start talking about like trying to capture a market and things like that.
Absolutely.